We are here with Dr. Hossein Mousavian at the Asia Society here on Park Avenue. We want to thank the Asia Society for making their offices available to us for this interview with Dr. Mousavian. He, of course, is the former chief negotiator for the Islamic Republic of Iran on the nuclear issue, several years on that brief. Not to mention he's been on the National Security Council under different administrations in Iran, and currently he's at the Woodrow Wilson Center at Princeton University, not far from where we are sitting here in uptown Manhattan. So thank you for coming, Dr. Mousavian.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure to see you. I've been following a lot of your writings, and we've got a few questions we'd like you to consider. But before we get to the actual questions, since it's such a fluid situation, if you'll allow me to say that some days ago, when the historic breakthrough was made, Israel and Saudi Arabia were not happy campers, and then how somehow they changed their position to support this agreement, and then the Iranians said that they would walk away if new sanctions are put in there, but then the U.S. government said, no, these are not new sanctions, they're connected to old sanctions, whatever. And then Foreign Minister Zarif just said a couple days ago that, no, we'll come back to the table. So could you comment on the current situation before we get to the questions?
Interim agreement has been reached on November 24th, 25th.
Right.
They are supposed to begin implementation of the interim agreement from January 2014. And the next round of high-level nuclear negotiations to reach the comprehensive package is supposed to begin by January or early February. There was a legal dispute whether the recent U.S. decision to impose new sanction has been violating the interim agreement or not, because the U.S. part was explaining that these legislations have been passed 6 months ago, and they could not do anything with it. But I believe the U.S. president could waive the sanctions.
Oh, I see.
I believe it was completely unnecessary. I believe this really damaged the nuclear negotiation process. Some people, they believed it has really derailed the process.
Yes, this is serious discussion.
But however, it's good to hear that they have decided to continue the further talks to reach the final deal. And I hope there would not be any more such a mistakes by the U.S. due to domestic pressures. I mean, the U.S. administration cannot justify mistakes because of domestic pressures. I mean, the international community and the world powers and Iran, they cannot pay the compensation because of the U.S. domestic problems.
To comment on how and under what circumstances do you think the Israeli and Saudi positions that were so hostile to this agreement, how did they become neutralized?
I don't believe they have been neutralized.
Oh, okay.
I believe when they felt they would be isolated, they decided to be a little bit more silent. And I believe they are doing everything they can behind the scene to disturb the process. Israelis, I believe they would never be happy to any type of deal, because Israelis, I mean, I don't say all of Israelis, more I'm talking about the current prime minister, who is looking for confrontation or war, because majority of Israeli security establishments and politicians, they oppose war with Iran. And Israeli public opinion, they don't want war with Iran. Therefore, we are talking about the policy of the current administration. I think Netanyahu don't want any type of deal, whether this is a fair deal or not, because the minute there is a final deal, Iranian nuclear issue is not anymore an issue, then he is faced with two big questions. One would be hundreds of Israeli nuclear bombs.
Right. How to justify that.
And then would be peace process Palestinian issue, because using Iranian nuclear issue, Netanyahu has been able to distract the international public opinion and politicians from the real issue, which is Arab-Israeli Palestinian issue and the Israeli nuclear bombs. But this is different about Saudi Arabia. I believe confidence building measures is possible with Saudi Arabia.
Right.
I believe Iran and Saudi Arabia, they should immediately sit together and to have a broad security dialogues, bilateral regional issues. And I believe they can negotiate. I believe they can agree. And this is completely different. That's why I have advocated a regional cooperation system to be established between Iran, GCC, and Iraq. All neighbors, countries around Persian Gulf, to establish a regional cooperation system like the cooperation system we have in Europe. Exactly the same model. And I think this is possible.
I would like to agree with that, of course, and you would think that the Saudis would be easier to work with than the Israelis. However, without getting too far off track, I remember that incident in Germany some weeks ago when Prince Turki El Faisal actually tried to rewrite history, and you caught him pretty well from the audience where he said that they didn't give a nickel for that 1980 to 88 war with Iraq, and it's known by everyone that billions of dollars were given, and he tried to deny that, and you explained 3 or 4 items that are undeniable in the recent history, but I guess he wouldn't be negotiating on behalf of the government. He is not having a portfolio at this time, although he's got a lot of influence. Well, not the first, but I'd like to get into the questions that I had assembled, and I appreciate you addressing our audience from aspects of the Islamic media to these are sympathetic people, not hostile people, and they want Iran to succeed and look at it as a great example. You've said, however, of course, we assume the interim deal is fair, but you've said that the IAEA is controlled by the major powers, and under such circumstances, Iran's allowing the IAEA to inspect the Iranian facilities without notice and even to go beyond the nuclear sites appears to be potentially dangerous. If you would comment on that.
Iran has already decided to be a non-nuclear weapon state.
That's important.
This is a strategic decision Iran has already made, before revolution, after revolution.
Right.
Although everybody knew that Shah is after nuclear bomb. Being a member of NPT. And IAEA, you are already committed to implement safeguard agreement. This is a must, all members. But due to tensions, accusations on Iranian nuclear program, the IAEA has been asking Iran for additional level of inspections, which would be possible only if Iran accept to implement additional protocol and subsidiary arrangement code 3.1. Any member of NPT which is ready to accept safeguard agreement, additional protocol, subsidiary arrangement code 3.1, these 3 arrangements, this would be the maximum level of transparency internationally exists. There is nothing beyond. I think in a final deal, Iran would be ready to accept the maximum level of transparency to ensure the international community that not only is really serious about implementation of NPT, but is really serious about the religious fatwa. The Supreme Leader has issued banning all weapons of mass destruction. The maximum level of transparency would be a very clear sign how Iran is sincere and serious for implementation of fatwa and NPT both.
So our Muslim audience would accept that fatwa easier than what is happening in the West, where it seems that the various media refuse to accept that Iran not only doesn't have a weapon, but doesn't want a weapon, and even it's forbidden by the interpretation of Islam that the Ayatollah has given in the fatwa. So this is a very important item. I just am frustrated that the West doesn't seem to accept that approach just because it's from the supreme leader. So the next question is, at the Sabin Center in Washington, President Obama said that Iran will not be allowed to enrich uranium on its own soil, period, he said. If that's the U.S. position, what will Iran achieve by talking to such an adversary?
I really don't know what is behind President Obama's statement. But what has been agreed and signed between 7 foreign ministers, the P5, Germany and Iran, clearly mentions that the deal would include enrichment to be defined by both parties. I mean, enrichment principally has been accepted. The next talks would be only about negotiation about the level, capacity, the needs of Iran, the condition of enrichment, not about the enrichment itself. Therefore, now we are far beyond challenging the rights of Iran for enrichment. This is already accepted. But Americans, they have another narrative to discuss. Americans, as far as I understand, have not recognized the rights of enrichment for any country since NPT in 1968, 1970. But in practice, they have accepted NPT in Brazil, enrichment in Brazil, in Germany, Netherlands, Argentina, Japan, while they have never recognized publicly, officially enrichment in other countries, but tacitly, practically, they have accepted.
In practice, they have.
In practice. I think this is what is going to happen about Iran, with one difference. And I mean, practically, they would accept in practice, but they need to discuss about the conditions, intrusive inspections, transparency issues, and all.
And you were recently quoted also saying that going by the rules, the letter of the law with the NPT is understandable, and Iran is willing to do that. But in this particular case, with 35 years of no communication with the big Western powers, then you're willing to go that extra mile just at the beginning as a confidence-building measure. That's what I'm getting from your recent writings. Okay. And in your writings, you've given sober and well-thought-out reasons why the U.S. and Iran should realize some of their common interests, as in solving the Afghan issue, the Iraq, and even the Syria issue. And there are many other things. I suggest our viewers to check out some of the writings. That's the positive part, that there are some common interests. Here's the pessimistic part, that Noam Chomsky came out a few days ago saying that really, if you look at it, since the Iranians embody a 5,000-year history, then it's easy to go back 60 years to the Mossadegh government that was overthrown, that he says that the U.S. has been torturing Iran for 60 years, starting with the Mossadegh incident, then the Shah for 25 years, then Saddam for 8 years, then the assassination of leaders, and all these types of things. One could draw an argument that they're just giving Iran a 6-month reprieve from this 60 years of torture. Of course, that's, embellishing it a little bit for our listeners, but that's how a lot of our political animals who look at the Islamic press and the others will view it. So convince them that this is more than a 6-month reprieve. This is
No, the point, the real big issue is mistrust.
That's right. Yeah.
Mistrust, Americans, they should understand, and the Westerns, is mutual. An Arab country has invaded Iran, and they have supported the aggressor. 1 million Iranian, they have been killed or injured.
Yes.
Weapons of mass destruction has been used against Iran. Saddam used chemical weapons. Unfortunately, the US and Europeans, they provided material and technology to use chemical weapons. 100,000 Iranians, they were either killed or injured. It is not only 1953 coup.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even if you come to the situation after revolution, what Americans they have done, like supporting aggressor, use of weapons of mass destruction, is far beyond a coup. I mean, the consequences.
Yes, really. Yeah, yeah.
These are something. Even Iranians they have a big mistrust on double standards.
Yes.
You know, look, the U.S. has and the Western countries and the world powers.
Yeah.
They have a strategic relations with those countries like India, Pakistan, Israel, which they have not accepted to sign NPT, and they have mastered nuclear bomb, and they have hundreds of nuclear bombs.
Yes.
And they are putting all pressures and sanctions against a country which is member of NPT and doesn't have nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
I mean, how really they can justify
It's
it?
easy for the victims to always see the contradictions and hypocrisy of those things, whether you're talking about the Iranians today or victims of other acts of imperialism and Zionism nationally and internationally. Anyway, I'd like to also talk about the realities of how politics work in America. And as an American, I would say that we have 4-year terms of our presidents. Normally, they'll get 8 years. And of course, I really think that the supreme leader, in this case, Ayatollah Khamenei, had to realize that this breakthrough that happened a few weeks ago could not have happened in a first term, because then it wouldn't have been a second term. So it had to be at this strategic time, I would like to say the first 2 years of the second term, which is where we are now. Because if he waited longer to the second 2 years, then he'd be a lame duck, Obama. Whereas the first 2 years of the second term is the time this breakthrough could have and should have occurred. So again, I'm kind of patting you on the back that this is a result of years of your work behind the scenes and writings, that this breakthrough happened at this time. And this is the analysis, I think, of many of our viewers and listeners in our paradigm, because there are a lot of political animals in all those countries in the Middle East, that they look at these events through the political lenses. So I hope you'll agree that this is an analysis that I think holds some weight, that this is the only time this breakthrough could have happened, the first 2 years of the second term, because he cannot run for a third term. And again, I congratulate you on that. If I could wrap it up now with the final question of our interview. Again, we are going to look at a very critical principle of the 1979 revolution. We know that our readers can read up on the technicalities. You mentioned the 3.1. They can read up on centrifuges, the 20% enrichment, etc. Finally, does this deal have the potential of creating expectations among the Iranian peoples that the officials will be forced to fulfill only through Western help? And if so, does this threaten or undermine the very basis of the 1979 revolution?
No, I think Americans, they now have come to understand 34 years of war, sanctions, pressures. They have experienced everything.
Really? Mm-hmm.
Everything.
Yeah.
Covert war, economic war, political war, conventional war, weapons of mass destruction, intelligence war, assassination of nuclear scientists.
Look at the 80 to 88 war. You
They
guys
have,
over in
they
Iran.
have tried everything.
You took radios from Radio
Sanctions,
Shack and made them into
pressures,
yeah.
unilateral sanctions, multilateral sanctions.
Yes.
However, after 34 years of coercion and political, economical, security war against Iran, Iran is, if not the most powerful in the region, is one of the most powerful, stable countries in the region. And now Americans, they are looking their allies, Egypt, Tunisia, and they see how strong, deep-rooted this nation in the region, despite of 3 decades of international, regional pressure, sanctions, war, how strong they are. And everybody is now concerned more than ever about the influence and power of Iran.
Yes.
Therefore, they have understood it's not going to get to anywhere.
Right.
even they are discussing that it was sanctions who brought Iran to negotiation.
Right.
They know very well that before sanctions, Iran had 3,000 centrifuges. After sanctions, 19,000. Before sanctions, Iran had a few hundred kilograms of enriched uranium.
Right.
After sanctions, about 10,000 kilograms. Before
So it
sanctions,
doesn't work.
before sanctions, Iran had it was enriching below 5%. After sanctions, 20%.
20%.
Yes, sanction worked, just to push Iran toward more
Independence and development on their own.
their own.
Yeah.
And they understand the nuclear program of Iran was much progressed just because of threats, sanctions, and pressures.
It's not a good idea to
This is
threaten.
not a good idea to continue.
Well, I'd like to wrap it up and thank you for your time, sir. Dr. Hossein Mousavian from the Woodrow Wilson Center at Princeton University. And we are here. He's granted us this interview for our listeners and readers, and we do appreciate it, sir. Again, thank you very much, sir.
Thank
Okay?
you. Thank you very
Doctor.
much.